It's been about 6 weeks since we set up our Bioactive Vivarium for our Leopard Gecko, so here's an update. You might wonder whether this enclosure with the undertank heater on the side of the glass here on the left provides the required temperature gradient, and it does. I've confirmed with my temp gun that the area under the hide here reaches the low to mid 90s Fahrenheit, so that works out great. And then a little further on, to the right of this hide, there is another hide, and she's dug a tunnel under this piece of cork bark here. So she has a perfect warm hide and a perfect cool hide. The plants seem to be thriving in this substrate. These two aloes here have been putting out new leaves. This kalanchoe has not only new leaves, but little plantlets growing along the edges of the leaves, indicating that it's doing quite well. And finally, this little haworthia, probably my favorite plant in the vivarium, also seems to be doing well. I've been pleasantly surprised at how quickly the microfunnel cleanup crew has established itself. This is the toilet or latrine corner that the gecko has chosen, and while we do find her waste deposited there, we haven't had to clean up much at all because the microfauna seem to be handling most of it. You can see a little white smear of urates, which is the white portion of the gecko waste, on the glass there, but we find very little of it, so the cleanup crew has been really efficient. The isopods, springtails, and mealworm beetles are what the microfunnel cleanup crew consists of. The top layers of the substrate, as the Biodude promised, remain quite dry, but if you dig into the leaves or you lift up the water dish, then you'll see that it's quite a bit moister in areas like that, especially under the water dish where we pour some of the excess water, and you can see the springtails establishing themselves quite well. There's no question that this vivarium is a lot more interesting to look at than the original Spartan quarters that we had for our leopard gecko before. It was just a 10-gallon tank with a paper towel substrate and the appropriate hides, appropriate undertank heater, but really, this is just so much more aesthetically pleasing to have in the house. If I could go back and change one thing about this project, I might consider putting the setup in a 29-gallon aquarium rather than this 20 long, just because the considerable depth of the substrate takes up about half the depth of the tank, and a 29-gallon has the same footprint but is just a little higher, which would be nice aesthetically and would also give more room for plant growth. But I know the gecko's really happy with it, and so am I. And now it's time to watch Pago engage in her favorite pastime. When we first got Pago, she was very young, only about 4 inches long, but we immediately began hand feeding her, and she took to that very well, and that's something we've kept up. The majority of her food has been offered by hand, although we do let her hunt sometimes, as you may have seen in some of our other videos. We dust all of the crickets with Repashy Calcium Plus, or sometimes with Herpavite, and that seems to work out well for us. Her only dietary item is not crickets. We also offer mealworms periodically, and she seems to enjoy those a lot. They're a little bit more difficult to hand feed just because of their shape. She has a harder time zeroing in on them, and while she will take them from our hands, we find that it's better to give her crickets by hand, and mealworms will often offer in a small dish. We've also noticed over time that she prefers to have the crickets offered abdomen first. She doesn't like the head first because of the antennae. They tend to tickle her in the face, and sometimes in her eye, and she really doesn't like that at all, so we usually offer the crickets abdomen first. I have to say, the original enclosure we had this gecko in was very utilitarian, and it was certainly adequate and could have been adequate for the rest of the gecko's life, but honestly, this enclosure is so much more aesthetically pleasing, so much more interesting, not only for us, but for the gecko. She seems a lot more stimulated and active. She's truly queen of her domain. And not only that, the maintenance of this enclosure is super simple. So I would highly recommend that anyone with a leopard gecko consider setting up an arid bioactive vivarium like this one.
Thanks for watching. I post videos every Friday, all related to keeping aquarium and vivarium pets. You're most welcome to leave a comment and a like, and for those of you who are waiting for an animal voiceover at the end,
Subscribe!